At my own 70th birthday party, my 5-year-old granddaughter pressed her small palm flat against my chest and looked up at me with eyes that were too serious for a child, wearing a party dress covered in tiny yellow suns. "Grandpa," she said, barely above a whisper, "I heard the lady talking. She said you won't find out." I looked across the dining room at Claudia, laughing with two of my oldest friends, her hand resting lightly on someone's arm. She was radiant. She was exactly the woman I had believed she was. I crouched down to my granddaughter's level. She reached into the pocket of her little dress with both hands, the careful way children carry things they've decided matter, and held out her mother's phone. "Welcome to Father's Revenge Stories. I'm glad you're here. Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's listening." And a note before we begin. This story contains fictionalized elements created for dramatic purposes, though the life lessons it carries are entirely real. I built things my whole life. Started with a pickup truck, a used transit level, and a handshake from a man in Asheville who needed a retaining wall poured before winter and couldn't afford to wait for the big firms. I was 26 years old. I had $600 and a belief that if I did the work right, people would call me back. That turned out to be true. 42 years later, Carver Construction had 300 employees across North Carolina and Tennessee, a reputation in commercial development that took decades of never cutting a corner, and a property on the ridge outside Asheville that my late wife Miriam had once described as the view we earned. She was not wrong. I met Miriam at a church potluck in the fall of 1979. She was 23, teaching second grade at the elementary school in town, and she had brought a peach cobbler that disappeared in 11 minutes. I ate 2 pieces and asked her name. She told me, then told me she had seen me at the last 3 services, and that I seemed like a man who was always thinking about something else. I told her she was observant. She said it wasn't a compliment yet. We were married 14 months later. Miriam was the reason the business survived its first hard decade, not because she managed it. She had her own career, her own students, her own world, but because she was the kind of person who could sit with you at 10 o'clock at night when the numbers were bad and not let you talk yourself into quitting. What she did when things were hardest was make coffee, sit across the kitchen table and say, "Tell me what you're going to do about it. Not what you're afraid of, what you're going to do." That question, asked the same way every single time, is worth more than any business advice I ever received. Our daughter Allison arrived in the spring of 1985. I remember standing in the hospital corridor with my hands shaking so badly I couldn't open a granola bar until the nurse came out and told me I had a girl. I sat down on a bench in that hallway and pressed my fists against my eyes and did not care at all who saw me. Allison grew up sharp. She had Miriam's patience and my stubbornness, which is a dangerous combination in the best possible way. She became a physical therapist, built her own practice by the time she was 31, right in the middle of Asheville. Her patients brought her tomatoes from their gardens and cards on her birthday. She was good at her work and she loved it, and watching her love it was one of the quietest satisfactions of my life. She met her husband at a professional conference in Charlotte in the spring of 2019. He was 35, well-dressed, confident in a room the way some men are, the kind of confidence that photographs well and wears thin in private. He had a story about a real estate development firm he was building that was always one deal away from something significant. Allison brought him to Sunday dinner that August, and I shook his hand and looked him in the eye and felt nothing I could put a name to. That bothered me later. Miriam, who was already sick by then, watched him across the table with the careful attention she gave to things she hadn't decided about yet. That evening, when we were alone, she said only, "He talks about what he's going to build more than what he's built." I told her he was still young. She smiled and let it go, the way she always let things go when she'd already planted what she needed to plant. They married the following June. Their daughter Wren was born in the fall of 2020, and when Allison put her in my arms for the first time, this small and astonishing creature, with her eyes still deciding what color they were going to be, I thought of Miriam so sharply it took my breath away. Miriam was diagnosed in the winter of 2020. Ovarian cancer caught late. The oncologist was direct, which I respected. "We had maybe a year," he said. "She lasted 20 months because she was the most determined person I had ever known, and she was not finished yet. She spent those months the way she had spent every other season of her life, purposefully, without waste, surrounded by the people she loved." She met Wren. She watched Allison with her daughter and wept the good kind of tears. She held my hand the last morning and told me I had been the best thing she had chosen in her life, and I told her the same, and that was the last clear thing I remember from the day she died. After the funeral, after everyone went home, I sat in our bedroom for a long time. The house was the fullest it had ever felt and the most completely empty. I was 68 years old, and for the first time since I was 26, I didn't know what I was building toward. That was the man Claudia Fenn found when she walked into my life 10 months later. My brother Hal called it a fundraiser. I called it the longest evening I'd been through since the reception after Miriam's service, because every social occasion since her death had felt like wearing a coat that belonged to someone else. Hal had been asking me to come for 3 weeks, and I had finally run out of polite ways to say no. The event was held at a hotel ballroom in Asheville, a benefit for the Children's Hospital, tables draped in white linen, 200 people in their good clothes, all of it perfectly fine and utterly exhausting. Hal found me near the bar around 7:30 with the expression he always wore when he'd done something he was proud of. "There's someone I want you to meet," he said. "Hal. She lost her husband a couple of years back. She's been involved in the Arts Foundation since she moved here from Charlotte. You'd have things to talk about." Claudia Fenn was standing near the window in a navy dress, dark hair swept back, sharp eyes that found mine the moment Hal said her name. She smiled, not the wide, practiced smile of someone working a room, but something quieter, as though she decided exactly how much warmth to offer before she offered it. I noticed I was evaluating the smile even as I was experiencing it. I told myself that was grief making me careful. We talked for 35 minutes. She asked about the construction business with what felt like genuine interest. She had opinions about Asheville's development corridor and the tension between growth and preservation. She mentioned her late husband only once, briefly, without dwelling, and I was more grateful for that than I could have said, because at 8 months out I still couldn't talk about Miriam without my voice doing things I couldn't control. I called her 3 days later. By April she had been to Sunday dinner twice. Hal liked her. She was easy with my housekeeper Glenda in a way that felt natural. I told myself I was simply enjoying the company of someone who understood what loss felt like. What I did not see, what I was not looking for, was what happened every time I turned away. Glenda has worked in my home for 15 years. She came through a referral when the business got large enough that I was traveling more, and Miriam decided she needed help with the house. Glenda is quiet in the way that careful people are quiet, not because she has nothing to say, but because she has learned that what you observe is worth more than what you announce. She began noticing Claudia in the 3rd month. She told me about it much later, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her hands folded, her voice steady in the way of a person who has rehearsed something difficult until the emotion is separate from the words. The first thing she noticed was the attention Claudia paid to the house's structure rather than its contents. Not the photographs, not the things that told the story of who lived there, but the function of it, who had access to which rooms, which accounts the household expenses ran through, whether I had a property manager or handled the finances myself. She asked these questions pleasantly over coffee, with the casual curiosity of a woman simply learning her new surroundings. No one felt interrogated. That, Glenda told me, was the craftsmanship of it. She was drawing a map, Glenda said, of everything you owned and everyone who helped you manage it. The second thing Glenda noticed was what Claudia did to Miriam's things. It happened slowly. A ceramic pitcher Miriam had brought back from a trip to Savannah moved from the kitchen windowsill to a cabinet. The framed embroidery Miriam's mother had made us as a wedding gift disappeared from the hallway and was replaced with a neutral landscape print that Claudia mentioned she'd found at a gallery on Lexington. A small thing, a reasonable thing. I thanked her for the thought and didn't think about it again for weeks, at which point the original had been in a storage box long enough that its absence had become normal. Glenda counted 11 items over 4 months. She started writing it down in a spiral notebook she kept in her apron pocket. Every date, every object, every conversation she overheard when she was in the next room, and Claudia did not know it. It was Leon who brought me the harder evidence. Leon has run security at the property for 9 years, since the 3rd time someone cut the fence on the eastern perimeter, and I decided I needed someone on site rather than a monitoring service. He came from 12 years in the sheriff's department, and he brought with him the habit of logging everything, every vehicle at the gate, every visitor, every anomaly and routine. He was not a man who came to me with observations. He came to me with documented facts. He started noticing Allison's husband in September, because of a pattern. The man began appearing at the property on weekday afternoons when I was in the office, always asking for something small, always staying longer than the errand required, always moving through the main house in a particular direction, toward the study. In October, Leon brought me a folder. Inside were 4 photographs from the property's security system. The first showed a car parked at the eastern gate at 11:40 at night. The second showed the study's side entrance at 11:52, a man I didn't recognize coming through with a leather briefcase. The third showed the hallway outside my filing room at midnight. The fourth showed the same hallway at 12:38, the man leaving. In his left hand, visible at the edge of the frame, was a manila envelope that had not been in his hands in the previous photograph. I looked at Leon across the desk. Who let him in? Allison's husband, Leon said. I have footage of him at the side door at 11:45, 2 minutes before the car arrived. He let the man in and let him out himself. He paused. He still has the gate code. You gave it to him 2 years ago when they were staying here during the renovation. I had forgotten about that code. Who's the man with the briefcase? The car's registered to a firm in Charlotte, Fenn Consulting Partners. I sat very still. Fenn, I repeated. Yes, sir, Leon said. I looked up the business registration. Incorporated 14 months ago. Listed principals are Claudia Fenn and a man named Hartwell. Listed as a financial advisory and estate planning services firm. He set a second sheet on the desk. Allison's husband appears on the firm's website as a contracted development associate. I want you to understand what this meant in practical terms, because it took me a moment to work through it myself. Claudia was not simply a woman who had inserted herself into my personal life. She had an incorporated business entity. She had a legal associate with a briefcase who had been inside my filing room at midnight. She had Allison's husband on her payroll. And in 4 months, at the birthday party she had insisted on planning, she had arranged for me to meet with an estate planning attorney she had recommended, a man I had never dealt with before, to review, as she put it, some long overdue paperwork. Leon, I said, I need to know if anything was removed from that room. Nothing had been taken, he told me, but the file containing my company's most recent operating agreement had been moved. The folder with my investment account statements had been opened and replaced slightly out of order. Write everything up, I told him, dated and signed. He stood to leave. At the door he stopped without turning. Mr. Carver, he said, in my experience, people who plan this carefully don't stop on their own. They stop when someone stops them first. He walked out. I sat alone with the photographs and the particular cold feeling of a man who has just understood something he wishes he had understood 3 months sooner. My closest friend Hugo Marsh has been a physician in Asheville for 30 years. We met when our daughters were in the same kindergarten class, back when we were both young fathers with too much work and too little sleep, and we'd been easy friends ever since. Hugo called me on a Sunday evening in November, and after the pleasantries, he asked me directly whether I was concerned about Allison. What did you see? I asked, because I knew that was what the call was about. He was quiet a moment. She came in for her annual physical last week, he said. Her husband drove her and waited in the parking lot, but she was guarded in a way I've never seen her, watching the door. He told me he had observed bruising on her left forearm during the exam. Recent. She said she'd caught it on a treatment table at the clinic. He had not believed her. I know the expression of a patient who's asking you without words to let something go, he said, and I know I'm not allowed to push. Federal privacy law exists for good reason, and she was not in immediate danger in my exam room. But she called me the following week and gave me explicit written authorization to tell you everything she told me. Allison had described the past 2 years, the way her husband had gradually convinced her that her practice was making her anxious, that her colleagues took advantage of her good nature, that what Wren really needed was a mother who was fully present rather than distracted by work. He had said these things so consistently and in such a gentle and caring register that Allison had eventually begun to hear them in her own voice. She had taken a leave of absence in January. She had not gone back. He had taken over the household finances, practically, sensibly, because she was tired and he was good with numbers. He had managed her friendships the same way, expressing quiet concern when she made plans, being distant and withdrawn for days when she came home from a lunch or a phone call with someone from her old life. He never forbade her from anything. He simply made the cost of independence so consistently exhausting that she had stopped paying it. He filmed her, Hugo said. During a hard night in February, she had been isolated for months. Wren was sick. She cried alone in the kitchen. He filmed it on his phone without her knowing. When she found out, he told her he was worried and hadn't wanted to bother you during your grief. He said he was protecting her. I pressed my hand flat on the desk. She tried to reach me, I said. 3 times, Hugo said. He intercepted 1 call. The other 2 she made from a friend's phone, but Claudia was present on both occasions and told him. Hugo told me that Allison had authorized him to speak professionally and on the record about what he had observed and what she had told him if it became necessary. She's been protecting you, he said. Even while all of this was happening, she was thinking about how to do this without breaking you. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my desk for a long time. I thought about my daughter at 6 years old, sitting in this same study watching me go over blueprints, telling me she wanted to build things too. I thought about Miriam saying quietly that her son-in-law talked more about what he was going to build than what he had built. Then I stood up and went to make 3 phone calls. I told Hal everything 2 days before the party, not the outline, everything. He sat in the kitchen and listened without interrupting, which was not natural for him, and when I finished he gripped my forearm with both hands, the way our father used to. "Tell me where to stand," he said. I told Hugo the same evening. He asked 2 questions, heard 2 answers, and said, "I'll be there." Leon had already been briefed. He simply nodded and said everything would be in position. The party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Claudia had organized it herself. 200 guests, the property decorated in the understated way she had a talent for, a string quartet hired from the university. She had told me the estate attorney she'd found would stop by early evening, just to go over some straightforward paperwork. She had smiled when she said it. That smile I had spent a year believing. I did not sleep much the night before. I sat in the study with the desk lamp on and let myself feel everything I had been holding at arm's length for months. I had let Claudia in. I had given her access to my home, my life, the edges of my finances. I had watched my daughter grow smaller and more careful, and told myself she was simply navigating the difficulties of a young marriage and new motherhood. I had been so hungry for comfort after losing Miriam that I had not looked carefully enough at who I was letting inside. I took out the photograph I kept in the desk drawer. Miriam and me on the porch of the first house we'd owned, 1983. Young, squinting into the afternoon sun, laughing at something Hal had said from behind the camera. I set it on the desk and sat with it for a long time. Then I went over the plan one more time until it was as solid as poured concrete. The guests began arriving at 2. I stood at the front door and greeted each of them with the full attention of a man who had made peace with the morning's requirements. Warm, unhurried, entirely present. Claudia moved through the room with the ease she always had in social situations, managing the gathering the way she managed everything. Smoothly, purposefully, with a smile that was exactly calibrated for whoever she was facing. At 3:15, Ren found me. I was near the fireplace talking with 2 longtime clients when I felt the small pressure of a hand against my jacket. I looked down. She was in her yellow party dress, dark hair and 2 uneven braids that were already coming loose, shoes she had clearly been talking herself into wearing. She was 5 years old, and she looked up at me with an expression that was older than 5. "Grandpa," she said, "I need to tell you something private." I excused myself and crouched down to her level. Around us, the party continued. Voices, music, the particular warmth of 200 people gathered in a house on a winter afternoon. "What is it, sweetheart?" She pressed her palm flat against my chest pocket. "I heard the lady talking," she said. "She and Daddy were in the study, and I was outside in the hall because I wanted a drink of water. She said the old man won't find out until it's already done." And Daddy laughed. She looked up at me steadily. "That's you, Grandpa. You're the old man." My throat tightened. I kept my face easy and my voice soft. "What else did you hear, honey?" She reached into her pocket with both hands and produced her mother's phone, held out to me the way children offer things they've decided are important. "I recorded it," she said simply. "I pushed the button Mommy showed me." I took the phone from her hands. I did not listen to it yet. I looked at Ren, her serious face, her careful eyes, and I thought about what it cost a 5-year-old to carry this across a room full of strangers, knowing it mattered without knowing why. "You did exactly right," I said. She nodded, satisfied the way children are when they've done a thing they were worried about and it turned out correctly. Then she looked past me at the dessert table. "Can I have cake now?" "Absolutely," I said. I watched her go. Then I looked across the room at Leon, who was standing near the hallway entrance. I gave him the signal we had agreed on, a slight turn of my right hand at my side. He reached for his radio. I found Allison near the garden windows, standing slightly apart from the other guests with a glass of sparkling water she wasn't drinking. She had seen Ren come to me. She had seen me take the phone. Her face held the expression of a woman who has been holding her breath so long she has stopped noticing she's doing it. I held her gaze for a moment, then I gave her the smallest nod. She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth. I turned and walked toward the center of the room. I have stood in front of many rooms in my life. Rooms where I presented bids for contracts that would keep 40 families employed. Rooms where I told a crew that a project was in trouble and I needed every one of them to hold the line. I understood something about standing somewhere and knowing that what you say next will not be forgotten. I asked for the room's attention. The music trailed off. 200 faces turned toward me with the comfortable expectation of a birthday toast. I thanked them for coming. I said it had been a year of understanding more clearly who the people in my life actually were. I said I had some things I wanted to share before the evening went any further. Then I nodded to Leon. The recording lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds. I watched the room as it played rather than watching my own face, because I had already heard it and I needed to see what it did to people who hadn't. Claudia's voice came through clearly, the same even, confident voice I had heard at dinner tables and on Sunday drives and across my own kitchen for a year. She was explaining to Allison's husband that the estate documents would be straightforward to execute at the party, that the attorney she'd arranged was reliable, that by the time I understood what I had signed it, would already be in probate-proof form. She used the phrase "the old man" the way someone uses a category, not a name. Allison's husband responded with a laugh I recognized, the comfortable, unsurprised laugh of a man who has been waiting for a plan to come together. When the recording ended, the room was so quiet I could hear the fire in the hearth. I said, "Glenda." Glenda had been standing near the kitchen doorway with her notebook since before the guests arrived. She walked to the center of the room with the unhurried composure of a woman who had been keeping this record for months and was not going to rush the delivery now that the moment had come. She read for 3 minutes, dates, objects removed from the house, overheard conversations in which Claudia had mapped the financial architecture of the property through casual questions to the household staff. The amounts transferred from the joint account Claudia had proposed in October. I later learned the total exceeded $60,000 over 6 months, moved in amounts carefully kept below the federal reporting threshold of $10,000 per transaction to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. Glenda's voice did not waver once. When she closed the notebook and stepped back, I said, "Hugo." Dr. Hugo Marsh rose from the second row and stood in front of people who had known the Carver family for decades. He introduced himself. He explained that his patient had authorized him in writing to speak, because under HIPAA, a physician may only disclose a patient's medical information with that patient's explicit written consent, and Allison had given hers. Then he described, in plain clinical language, what he had observed at Allison's physical and what Allison had subsequently told him. He used the term coercive control. He described the pattern of isolation and financial dependence with the measured precision of a man who had treated its effects for 30 years and wanted every person in that room to understand exactly what it was. He spoke for 2 minutes. Then the side door opened. Allison walked in wearing her regular clothes, jeans, a gray cardigan, her hair pulled back the way she wore it at home. She had not dressed for a performance. She had dressed like herself, because herself was what she had come to reclaim. She walked down the side of the room with her chin level and her shoulders back, and she did not look at Claudia, and she did not look at her husband. She looked at me. I reached out my hand. She took it. Her grip was hard and certain and warm, and I held on with everything I had, and she held on back. Allison's husband moved first. He stood from his chair and turned toward the door and stopped, because 3 men were in the aisle. 2 were attorneys from a firm in Asheville, who had arrived through the kitchen entrance 20 minutes earlier, holding civil claims paperwork on behalf of 2 investors in Charlotte, who had been waiting several months for the right moment. The third was Hal, who was 69 years old and had the particular stillness of a man who has decided something and does not need to say it out loud. Allison's husband looked at the attorneys. He looked at Hal. He looked at me. I held my daughter's hand and looked back at him and felt in that moment, not anger, something quieter, the stillness of a man who has done what needed doing and can simply stand in the fact of it. Claudia had not moved from the far side of the room. She was still holding her glass of wine, and then she was not, because she set it down on a side table with a care that was the last performance she had left. She stood in the winter afternoon light in front of 200 people, and the warmth she had maintained for a year was simply gone. What was underneath it was nothing I recognized. It was the face of someone who had built an identity entirely out of strategy, and found, when the strategy failed, that there was nothing beneath it that was hers. The Asheville Police Department had been contacted the previous evening. 2 officers arrived through the side entrance at 4:15. They were professional and quiet. There was no scene. There was only the process of a thing being made right. They left the property at 5:20. I know the exact time because Leon logged it, the way Leon logged everything. The guests stayed longer than I expected. Some came to find me in pairs and threes, pressing my hand or my shoulder, saying the things that decent people say when they want you to know they're on your side without making it about themselves. I thanked each of them. I meant it each time. I found Allison in the kitchen at 6, sitting at the table with Wren on her lap. Wren was eating a piece of birthday cake she had clearly negotiated for herself. Allison had her arms around her daughter and her chin resting on top of Wren's head, and she was looking out the window at the lights of Asheville and the valley below. I sat across from them. Wren looked up at me with frosting on her chin. "Grandpa," she said, very seriously, "it was a good party." Allison made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. "It was," I said. We sat there for a while in the kitchen warmth, the three of us, not talking much, just present, just together. After Wren fell asleep on the couch in the next room, Allison and I stayed at the table with our coffee going cold between us, and she told me the rest of it. Not all at once, but carefully, the way you tell someone something that cost you a great deal and you want to be sure it's received the way it was paid for. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I put my hand over hers. "You protected Wren," I said. "Every day, in impossible circumstances, you protected her. That is what I see." Her jaw tightened, her eyes went bright. She looked out the window for a moment. Then she said, in a voice rough at the edges but steady at the center, "Mom would have figured out Claudia in about 2 weeks." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine and surprises you. 10 days, I said, maybe less. Allison laughed too, and then she pressed her lips together and shook her head slowly, and there were tears on her face she didn't bother to wipe away, and I put my arm around her and she leaned into me, and we sat like that for a long time in the kitchen that had always been the center of this house. Later, after Allison and Wren had gone to bed in the rooms that had always been theirs at Carver Ridge, I went to the storage room off the laundry hall. I found the box where Claudia had placed Miriam's things, the ceramic pitcher, the embroidered frame, the others. I carried them back to where they belonged, one at a time, unhurried, putting each one in the place it had occupied for years. The photograph of Miriam from our 25th anniversary went back on the mantel in the study. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I went to find Glenda, who was finishing the last of the evening's work in the kitchen. I told her I wanted to discuss a change in her position, effective immediately. She looked at me with the careful expression of a person bracing for something unexpected. I told her she was being promoted, full authority over the household operations, a salary increase she had earned several years ago, and the guest cottage on the north side of the property that had been sitting empty since Miriam's mother stopped making the trip. I told her this house had been fortunate to have her for 15 years, and that it was past time for the house to say so clearly. Glenda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Miriam would have done this years ago." "Yes," I said, "she would have. I'm sorry it took me longer." Glenda nodded once, accepting that. "I'll take the cottage," she said. "The north side gets good light in the morning." I sat in the study that night with the lamp on, and the house finally quiet around me, and I wrote 3 lines in the notebook I keep in the desk drawer. Not a plan, not a record, just 3 lines for the version of myself that will read them someday when this year has enough distance to be understood whole. I was not foolish, I was grieving. There is a difference. The people worth keeping are the ones who stayed honest when honesty was hard. Wren knew. She always knew. I looked at Miriam's photograph on the mantel for a long time. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in longer than I could honestly say, I went to bed and slept. I am telling you this because I needed to say it out loud, and because I believe some things are only fully understood when they're given to someone else to hold for a while. Here is what I know. Grief is real. The hunger for warmth after loss is one of the most human things there is. But I let that hunger make decisions that my eyes and my heart should have made instead. Don't do what I did. Don't let the quiet of an empty house convince you to stop looking carefully at who you invite into it. I was a grandfather who nearly lost everything, not to strangers, but to people I fed at my own table, people who knew exactly how to use the gaps that loss leaves behind. And I am a grandfather whose 5-year-old granddaughter walked across a room full of adults, her mother's phone tucked in the pocket of a yellow party dress, because she decided the right person to tell was me. I believe the right people come into your life at exactly the right moment. Wren was mine. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for being here until the very end.